Time flies when you're having fun. We're at our final panel of the day. And what better subject to think about smart societies but the life science industry, which is so important right now. I just want to welcome our panel up to the stage. Welcome. I will see where you're sitting soon here, depending on Gustaf is going to be sitting next to me here, and Cecilia and Johan. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
The life science industry, we're talking about how these made in Sweden innovations are really being scaled up and helping patients all over the world. And all this takes collaboration and co-creation. It's really a test lab of everything we've been talking about today, and we've heard from all the other speakers and all the other sectors. What are some of the key factors that you found with this successful collaboration and co-creation? I think it's interesting after everything we've heard to really get this like industry example. Gustaf, do you want to start off?
Absolutely. So I think in life science, it's quite complex. So collaboration is absolutely vital. And I think Sweden have a very rich tradition of collaboration between academia, companies, medtech companies, life science companies, and also the healthcare systems. So I often say that the best ideas do not come from my organization, Elekta, rather from our collaborations with the best universities in Sweden, but also around the world. So we need to be experts in commercializing them. And I always feel great when we can bring those technologies out in the world, because that's when you can get leverage, that's when you can reach. We do cancer patients, we do cancer care, reaching cancer care patients around the world. And I think for all of us, cancer is very personal. All of us have been affected. And taking that innovation from the lab, from the clinic, through the commercial process, and to the hospitals, and to the patients, and bringing that hope is what I think it's all about. And I think I'm very proud of Sweden. That I think we're doing that very, very well.
Cecilia, do you want to?
Yes, I'd like to make an analogy. Sweden was never best at individual sports. Maybe with the exception of tennis and downhill skiing. But when it comes to team sports like ice hockey, we're pretty unbeatable. And I think we talked earlier about the ecosystem or quadruple and triple helix model, where industry, healthcare, academia, and the government come together and form alliances. And one concrete example of this is during a state visit to India, which His Majesty led a couple of years ago, we formed the Vision Zero for hospital-acquired infections or healthcare-associated infections, based on the road safety initiative that was launched by the road safety authorities many, many years ago to bring down fatalities. And this is where we're looking at solving a problem that we share, preventing people from infections. That has now led to a platform where we share knowledge and we train people and we bring the needs of the healthcare sector and interact. And I think that is really when we establish sound partnerships across industries, across sectors, that's when we really can benefit from the collaboration.
Johan, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at XVIVO, we work with transplantation, and basically all our innovation has come from collaboration and co-creation with research institutes and academia. One example is we work with a center called Igelösa and Professor Stig Sten. And that technology today is one of the most groundbreaking within lung transplantation. So they do the basic research, and we do, as you were talking about, product development, bring it through clinical trials, and then out in the market. At the same time, then, it doesn't stop. You have to work very closely also with, let's call it your customers, be interested in their research to understand actually how you create clinical practice when you have something that is new and groundbreaking. And today we know, for example, if you take lungs, 20% of all lungs which are being donated for transplantation is actually leading to transplantation. 80% is discarded in a world where organ shortage is a big issue. With this technology, we can lift that number up to 40-50%, which is quite amazing. And we see that now around the world in many of the large transplant centers. So for us, I think that co-creation, working with big research institutes, not just in creating the innovation, but bringing it out, is an absolute fundamental success factor. And so following science and being research driven is something that we have very close to our heart, so to say.
And I think too, if we're having life science representatives here on stage, obviously we're all thinking about the past year and a half we've had COVID-19. It's had consequences for the entire sector, even if you're not directly related. I know in manufacturing, any medicines or supplies. Tell me a little bit how something like this makes you have to rethink, reinvent what you're doing, how you're working, who you're co-creating and collaborating with. Do you have any kind of practical examples to share that would really inspire other sectors as well?
Absolutely, and I think for the life science industry, what has been achieved over the last 1.5, 2 years has been absolutely amazing. The amount of innovation in such a short time, if you look at the vaccines, for example, at the race for the vaccines. But I think if you are in other industries, and maybe not related directly to COVID, it has been about rethinking how you do things. We couldn't get to the customers. We couldn't service our machines. And the logistics challenges has also been a big thing we needed to cope with. So it's been about coming up with digital way of working with the customers, but also training the clinical professions around the world has been so important, and guiding them through the big cancer backlog that is now building up around the world that we need to address in the coming years. So this, I think we will bring so much knowledge, so much new processes, so much digitalization, so much automation from the crisis into the future, and make the future brighter from that point of view.
Anyone have anything to add there?
Yes, I read a report by the WHO yesterday saying that the pandemic had set back healthcare by 2 decades, 2 full decades. There's a huge backlog of cancer patients not having had the diagnostics or the treatment, elective surgeries, people not having new knee joints or whatever it is. If we add to that the antimicrobial resistance, which risks setting us back to the 1940s before penicillin was invented, it's a pretty gloomy picture. But I think what the pandemic has actually done is put a finger on the need for prevention. We need to prevent further pandemics. We've had vaccines in no time, but we also need to prevent bacterial infections. So I think it's put prevention on the spot. As you mentioned, artificial intelligence, traveling digitally, training, sharing knowledge through that, and co-creating. Scania is another brilliant example where the government called on the action of the industry to help support in a crisis. Industry teamed up and provided supplies. Scania helped with logistics staff. That's another way of co-creation. And I think let's not go back to where we were before, but let's take this leapfrog moments and go ahead and accelerate the development.
Yeah. I could maybe add a few comments. Similar, I mean, we see a much greater need on how we drive professional education now compared to before through digital channels, etc. as one. But what's even more interesting, or in a way very sad, building on what you said, that there is a backlog of healthcare that is needed, is that in our field we also see a lot of new patient groups coming up that needs to be dealt with in a different way. Was reading a report a couple of weeks ago where every 10th lung transplant in the US is now from a COVID patient. And then when you turn that around, we will also have donors of organs who have had COVID, which will also, drive for new technologies, how you evaluate organs, and how you can be more effective in dealing with this problem, which is already great when it comes to organ shortage. So that's something we see. We need new ways of working.
Well, you're our last panel of the day, so it also means you get the last question of the day. And there's something that everybody here in the live audience, here in Dubai, and our virtual audience from all around the world really wants to know, and that is your call to action. Because as we were saying, health, well-being, it's an important part of creating a smart society. But what's your sort of vision, your call to action you want to share? How can we create the impact for people around the world that we've been talking about, all this impact, but at the same time being at the forefront of innovation? I wish I could have, if I had more time, I would have asked everyone in every panel, but you get to represent everyone today here and answer that question.
Thank you. That's a big honor. And I would summarize it in one word. And it's the word I've heard most in UAE and Dubai. It's hope. I went to a hospital on Monday, and it was a cancer hospital. And it was a small clock that you can ring. And it was for all the cancer patients that had gone through their treatments. And they would chime the bell. And that was the bell of hope. And I think bringing that hope around the world is my call to action. And then the question how to do it. I think over the last decades it's been so much about breakthrough innovation. But I think right now it's much more about innovation around implementation. We need to bring these amazing technologies we have. And that's where I'm very hopeful out to the parts of the world that is not getting access to whatever life science or cancer care that they don't have in those countries. So that's the call to action to myself, but I think to all of us as well.
I'd like to start with a vision, and that's the vision of having equal access to good health and well-being and healthcare. Focus on healthcare instead of sick care. And I think in order to get there, we really do need to collaborate across industries, across countries, because we can make use of technology to travel much further, travel much faster, bring more people in, use the advances in developing countries who have leapfrogged the innovation and are not suffering from legacy systems which hold them back, but they can go much quicker than many of us can. And then finally, focus on prevention. Prevention for people, prevention for patients, because prevention is always better than cure. It saves a lot of lives across the world. And yes, let's invest in prevention.
I mean, our vision is that no one should die waiting for a new organ. A lot of people on a waiting list today. WHO's report is showing that there is around 160,000 transplants happening globally every year. The need is roughly 1.6 million. So we're only meeting 10% of the demand today. So our call to action in our industry is, of course, to make sure that we can provide technologies so that you can better utilization. But also beyond that, there are legislation, there are cultural aspects, number of things on how to increase the donor pools as such, so that more people can get a life-saving transplant. Kidney diseases, for example, I think there's several million of people today living with a kidney disease end stage who have, go for dialysis for 10 years, extremely costly, quality of life coming from that. Transplantation could help that situation quite dramatically. We have technologies already which are existing in our industry that can help increase utilization. We know that for lung transplants, if you can reduce the waiting list by 10%, you will decrease the mortality by 40%, as an example. New other technologies coming, xenotransplantation, where you take organs from animals to humans. It's not far off. First kidney happened this year, actually, earlier. Heart transplantation from animal to human, a few years ahead. Some ethical, of course, issues around that needs to be solved. 3D printing of organs will come. It will take time, but there's a lot of nice actions going on in this area, and I mean, the company I work for and our industry are very committed to how can we, support, solving this global issue of organ shortage.
this is really great to hear these practical examples from your own work. And I want to thank you to our final panel for their final reflections and a great call to action for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.